Good evening. My name is Brian McKay, and I consider myself very fortunate to be a friend of Tim Burns. The title of Tim's exhibitions always seemed to be Against the Grain. And on reflection, having known Tim now for nearly 30 years, I'm convinced that he's been against the grain since he was 5 years old. But before we get onto the exhibition itself, I'd like to pay a special tribute to Art on the Move. It's indefatigable director and it's really energetic and creative staff. 35 years ago, when Harry Bluck was the chairman of the West Australian Arts Council and I was the deputy chair, Harry said that he noticed that the people in the regions were starved of cultural activity, of exhibitions, performances, and so forth. So between us, we put together a submission to the then Premier, who was a knight of the realm and played the trumpet in the Salvation Army band. And he came back with the answer to us that it was unfortunate that if people lived in remote areas, that they had to come to the city to look at exhibitions or to see performances. I first met Tim at Noel Sheridan's place in Nedlands, where we had had dinner with the Sheridans, and then Noel said, "I've invited Tim Burns along." I hadn't any idea who Tim Burns was at that time. And Tim arrived. He looked a bit scruffy. He was dressed all in black, and his glasses looked like oxy welding goggles. And I think he cut his hair with pinking shears, but it all added to his character. Anyway, he then gave us a demonstration of rap. I was never keen on rap, but Tim gave us rap for about an hour and a half, and gradually, like a hypnotic discussion, I got to like it. So then the next time I heard about Tim, because after that he disappeared, I think he went back to New York, was an anecdote that Donald Brooks told us when Donald had been appointed to head up the new art school at Flinders University. And in the city of churches and trees, he felt that if he had someone like Tim Burns as artist in residence, then it would fire the place up a bit. And this turned out to be true, because when Tim arrived, he was allocated one of the professorial rooms along an avenue of senior lecturers and so forth and so on as his studio. So the first thing that Tim did was cut a big hole at eye level in the door and glaze it and frame it. His assumption was that people should see what he was doing as artist in residence. It was fair enough. And then he proceeded to have a performance in there where he and a young girl stripped off and painted each other with gold paint. And this so outraged the Vice-Chancellor and the directors of the university that they wanted Donald Brooke to stop the whole residency straight away. So, in effect, Donald was forced to do this. But he didn't bear Tim any malice, and for years afterwards he took the door off its hinges and replaced it, and he kept the door as a memorial or a work of art of Tim's. So the second account of my personal involvement with Tim was fairly recently, when the York Council decided to commemorate the anniversary of the town. And the committee up there, which consisted of an artist, a prominent artist, and the city councillors and the vicar of the church. And this friend, the artist who was organising the whole show, rang me and said, could I come up to York and with Joe and stay the night to look at the list of artists to see if I thought that anybody should be included. So we went up there and had a nice meal with the vicar and John, this artist friend, and we looked through the list after the meal, and I was checking them all off, and I noticed that Tim Burns' name wasn't there. So I said, hang on, what about Tim Burns? And a shudder went through the room as if I'd suddenly told him I had leprosy. And because Tim had created such a different lifestyle in York that he was a pariah, you know. So I thought that Tim should be included, and I said, what you have to realise is that not only is Tim a prominent West Australian artist, but he's a national artist as well. He's got a reputation in New York, in Sydney, and he is considered to be one of the most progressive artists in Australia. You'll have to have him on your list. And they said, we can't invite him on this particular project. So I thought this was very unfair, and I said, well, look, if Tim's not included, then I'm going to have to withdraw myself, and I'm sure that I could persuade George Haynes and Bob Juniper, one or two of the others. And there was a long silence, and then they said, oh, well, we'll get back to you. And then soon after that, Tim was invited to exhibit. The interesting thing is that at the opening, Tim's work of art was by far the most interesting, and he had addressed the actual notion of the 150th anniversary of York. He'd gone to the Batty Library or the archives and found a photograph of the earliest settlement with old buildings and horses and carts and what have you. And it really gave you the impression of what York was like 150 years ago. So his painting was the star of the show. And one of the other interesting things about Tim, as well as his physical bravery, is his charm. And there he was on the opening night with those councillors and the vicar. He was chatting them up and smiling. He really impressed me and impressed a hell of a lot of people. And most people shared my view that Tim's painting was the best work in the whole show. So I wish I was here with you to see the exhibition. I know it's going to be interesting and challenging, and I know that it will astonish a lot of people. And when you think of Gertrude Stein's view, or her view, of a work of art, was that the work should astonish you. And I know that, well, Tim's work has always astonished me. So my congratulations to Tim. As I say, I wish I could be there in person, and all I can say now is that I declare the exhibition open, and thank you for your attendance.